There's an awful statistic, I think it's 30% of women going through menopause will leave their jobs. That's 30% of senior women. I remember being on site for one of our projects with a grad, and they were asking him questions because he's the guy. And you're just like, oh my God.
Angela Dapper is a British architect living in Melbourne. She runs her own studio focusing on socially sustainable architecture that enhances local communities and enriches lives. Across Angela's career, she's worked for a number of prominent practices within the UK and Australia, leading major projects and working as an advocate for diversity within the architecture profession.
I find it really uncomfortable, the space of people doing social housing yet taking a profit from things that are community-based and necessary. Part of what I'm setting up in my business is to set it up so the profit then get rolled back into people and community to create a cycle where it perpetuates, better outcomes for everybody.
Why did you become an architect?
I think I chose to be an architect by about the age of 12, 13. And then I was really stubborn because so many people went, oh, you want to be an architect? Well, you can't do that. Oh, you're a girl. You'd hate it. All of those comments that made me more determined to just go, no, watch me do this.
Angela, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So just getting straight into it, why architecture? What is it about a career in architecture that keeps you getting up in the morning? What is it about being an architect that you really kind of align with?
I think for me, I kind of feel that question would be answered differently by every single person in architecture. And I think that's probably the best thing about architecture. It's just so broad. You're an architect and you're doing podcasts, we're talking about architecture, we do architecture. I feel that it's so broad that at any one point in time, you can be doing a different role in architecture. And I think that's what keeps me going, is the diversity of architecture itself. Keeps it interesting.
No, I completely align with that. I think obviously there are the unglamorous sides of it, like area schedules, which I seem to hate. But yeah, I think you're right that sort of variety is the real value piece. And maybe it is that thing of when you're stuck in your early career, when if you're on a large project, for example, and you're designing the toilets, maybe you don't always feel that variety, but it does come. It is a marvelous kind of part of the career. What would you say is your kind of route into architecture? Why did you become an architect? And was there something in your sort of early upbringing and family life that kind of led you to this career path?
It's a really interesting question because I didn't know, I grew up in a small country town. I didn't know any architects or anything about architecture. But I did know that I like drawing. I really like drawing. I love drawing buildings. So I was very much into drawing perspectives, drawing elevations, and for no apparent reason. Loved doing maths, but loved the kind of, and I think a lot of architects are quite, instead of being on the creative side, more process driven. So I love the idea of putting things together and process. So for me, something in a career in physics or maths was kind of where I was always going. But I think I chose to be an architect by about the age of 12, 13. I was really young.
Yeah.
And then I was really stubborn because so many people went, oh, you want to be an architect? Well, you can't do that. And there was all of that, oh, you're a girl, you'd hate it. And I was just, it was all of those comments that made me more determined to just go, no, I'm doing it.
No,
Watch me do this. So there was nothing kind of in particular. I think it was just all of those things I enjoyed doing, I wanted to keep doing. I kind of thought it was more about drawing and all of those lovely things. But as we know that, there's a lot more to architecture. That's a small part of the role. But no, there was nothing kind of in particular. Probably came out of stubbornness of me, people saying that it wasn't right for me and me going, no, yeah, I'm doing it. I will show you. And I think I've probably kept that. That's probably a key part of my career, is just literally being a little bit stubborn.
I mean, how did that sort of continue through your kind of university days? Was it always you feeling like you were fighting a little bit of an uphill battle against the system?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, so I was at university in the 90s, and it was a very different time. And so even in that time, I think we almost started out 50-50 in terms of gender at the start of architecture. By the end of it, I think we were the numbers of women were down to 25%. My first job, I got paid less than someone else who graduated from my university with lower marks than me. I got paid less. And I was like, what are you talking about? So I think always that's kind of in your mind. You're like, sorry, like, I don't know. I'm too practical a person to kind of understand why that happens. But when I saw that happened, that was kind of, yeah, I hated that. And so that was not an uphill battle, but kind of, yeah, definitely a bit of a battle or something there that you just kind of go, no, like, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to take part in this kind of unequal profession. I'm here
Mm.
to do this equally. Like, you've got to let me do it. So there was always a bit of that, I think, throughout my career. And I kind of hope that it's a bit better now. But yeah, definitely in the 90s, it wasn't a great place for young female architects in Australia
Yeah.
and in London. Yeah.
Just on that, the sort of Australian London divide, what was it about? So you were educated in Australia and then came to London. What was the draw of London?
The there I think it was just opportunity. So I think it was always Australia always feels a little bit on the other side of the world. And I think because it's separate from so many other countries, you always feel a little bit separate. So when you're studying, and you're studying architecture, well, you're studying global architecture and global architects, but then you feel quite removed.
Sure.
So I worked in Australia for a couple of years. And I was, and this was the 90s, and I was doing 3D visualizations and fly throughs, which no one was kind of doing, which meant I was doing like loads of them. So I spent a lot of time just doing 3D models, which I kind of felt wasn't where I wanted to be. So I took it off my CV, said I couldn't do it, and then moved to London, and then actually did some like technical detailing, and kind of really felt like I got into architecture. So it was about opportunities, and I think for me coming from Australia, London was a place of opportunities where they didn't ask. It's you're from another country, they don't ask you which university you go to, which they
Or
do.
yeah.
If you're from the UK, they definitely do that in the UK. But because I came from another country, I was very much taken on by merit, which I loved. So for me, it was about opportunities.
I know you spent a long time at Denton, Corker, Marshall, which incidentally are a Australian practice.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And your time on the Stonehenge Visitor Centre, which obviously was a incredibly prominent project in the UK. Lots of attention around that. I wonder whether you would spend a little bit of time just reflecting on that and your experience, because I mean, obviously, that must have been incredibly complex, incredibly sort of drawn out, negotiating with different stakeholders, and an amazingly sort of sensitive project, which I know has won awards, and you won awards for your participation in.
Yeah, really, really difficult, really complex. A lot of interested parties. So the list of stakeholders, was I think all the stakeholders that we had to kind of go back to every time we had a design update. I think we had like over 100 or something. It was amazing the amount of people, interested parties, that had proper interest as well, not just interested. They were a part of the
Yeah, yeah,
project.
sure.
And also don't forget there were so many failed schemes before this one.
Mm.
So, we had other architects. At one point, I remember an architect, quite a prominent architect, rang up and went, I know you've just won this, but it probably won't go ahead. And I'm like, why are you call why are you calling me to tell me that we're going to fail? Like, no. And so, I mean, it was a really interesting one because it 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 was hard. There was a lot of visibility. There was a lot of decision making. It changed locations a number of times.
Mm.
A lot of people had a view of what it should look like. It's at Stonehenge. It should be heavy and grounded. And it's just like, and we did something kind of light, and it was kind of the opposite of what people
Yeah.
expected. But yeah, so a lot of people had a lot of opinions, and it was quite a long road to get it through planning, through the stakeholder consultation, etc. There were so many points where it could have failed, and I think for me, it's a really great example of a lot of people coming together to make this work. The clients were amazing. Do you know some of the curators, like from the archaeologists, were amazing. Some of the architects I worked with
Mm.
and consultants were amazing. They all had a part in getting it through the kind of complexity of some of the processes we had to go through. Um, But the other thing that was brilliant about this, so it was designed by Barry Marshall from Denton, Corker Marshall, who, did lots of beautiful pencil sketches. He had a really clear vision of what it should be, like really light on the landscape, something that was kind of opposite of what Stonehenge is, which is heavy and seeped in history. So it wanted to be light, something that people pass through to go and visit the stones. That kind of clarity of vision held it together for the whole project. So we were designing furniture with that in mind. We were designing, all the materials,
Yeah.
about the sustainability, the structure, everything with that in mind. So it was really, from a kind of design process perspective, like an amazing example of how to do design thinking in a really clear way. To the point that when it started on site, the contractor did a speech for all the people working on site to talk about how, what the design vision was. I've never heard a contractor talk
Yeah,
about
yeah, yeah.
design vision. I
Wonderful.
listened in because I
No.
thought, oh, this will be interesting. I wonder if they got it. But it was so simple that they got it. And I was like, that's it, isn't it? It's the simplicity of something that you just go, all right, that's it. I know what screws to pick. I know what that window detail is. I know what the furniture is. Like, everyone was kind of on board with a singular vision. And I think
Mm.
that was a kind of really lovely cohesion of that project, which meant that because we were doing the visitor centre, we were also doing the roundabouts and the roads and the path around
Mm.
Stonehenge. It was loads of
Sure.
work
Yeah, yeah.
beyond the visitor centre, but it pulled it all kind of together. So it was, which made it low key. So everything was low key because everything was kind of under the same kind of principle, but nothing was
Mhm.
jarring. So you don't see, it's like under designed, which is really, yeah, really nice. But I think a really good example of a whole lot of people coming together to do that. But yeah, I spent 5 years on that project. It was like another child. You just put
Yeah, yeah,
such
yeah, I can imagine. I mean,
essence in it.
that is the crazy thing with people coming into architecture is just the amount of time that it takes. It's none of us kind of get into it for the sort of the fast track sort of thing. Architecture, and particularly good architecture, takes a lot of time. I
Yeah.
wonder. I mean, you reflected on the sort of clarity of vision and stuff, and I think, like you say, that is such an incredible kind of skill and something that architects can be particularly good at. Guiding that sort of the big idea, guiding that concept through. Presumably, is that something you've kind of taken through with you into your sort of further career? Because I know you've held very senior positions in three major practices. DCN, Grimshaw, and is it Architectus? You say it?
Architectures, yeah.
Yeah, very senior positions in that, and I'd love to kind of understand those skill sets that you kind of have used and grown over time, being in those positions.
It's an interesting one to kind of compare them because they're all different. I think the scale makes things different because, like, the sheer amount. So DCM, I
Mm.
think we had at one point we had 50 people. We were generally about 30 people. Quite often we're about 20. So I think when I left DCM in London, we're about 15, 20 people. We weren't big. And I think there's something different about how you communicate in that kind of way because there's less communication. What I also took for granted, because I was there
Mm.
for such a long time, I kind of grew into that role. And so you kind of, you know what you're doing, your context and your surrounds and all the people you're working with, and you kind of grow into the role that's there. And so I think that's quite a different way of being a leader when you kind of grow. And a lot of people kind of grow into their roles through promotion. And I think
Sure.
it's quite
Yeah.
quite a normal way of doing it. But everything
Mm.
around you. It's quite, you don't think about it. And I think when you kind of leave that kind of role, you realize you took so much for granted. So the culture at
Mm.
DCM in London was amazing and so chilled out. And we discussed everything openly and everyone was really supported. And you kind of take that as being normal. But then you go to other
Mm.
practices and you realize it's not normal. Or some people actually have to work really hard on their culture to make it work. So I think there's different things. So yeah, DCM was an interesting one because I was there for so long that I kind of grew into the role. But then I became a partner and realized that, obviously you only know what you know from your previous role. So I got a coach
Mm.
at
Of
that point.
course. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and just went, okay, I need to learn. I need to know what I'm doing. So when I do this role, I do it well. So I don't want to just do it. I just want to know what are the other
Mm.
options. How do I do this well? How do I excel in this role? So I got a coach, which I would highly recommend to everyone. yeah, it's brilliant just to hone your skills and learn all those things about business that you don't get taught as an architect. And you kind of learn along the way.
Mm,
But when you learn it along the way, you learn one way of doing things. So learning, from a broad selection of, how people are doing it in the marketplace, what are other options? How can we challenge what we're doing? I think was great. Um, then I moved to Grimshaw. Grimshaw was 320 people, which was
yeah.
one of the reasons I moved is I wanted a new challenge. Um, and I wanted to understand what big looked like. I kind of thought maybe I'd like a big practice. And so I just wanted to try it as well, just to try on for size. And I think that's a nice thing for people to do in their career is try a few things just to see what works.
Mm,
Um, Grimshaw was 320 people. And so that meant because people were always coming in and things were kind of always moving around with different projects, they really worked hard on their culture, but had a fantastic office culture. So for
mm,
me, part of what I was doing there was, running projects, doing my kind of principal role, but also doing cultural roles. So I was head of their diversity group and did a lot
right.
of work because I was already doing work around gender, but doing work around gender in a big practice is different because, it's 320 people. You're always working at it. You're working with people, but you have to be really open to listen to what people are saying. And I think that was really because when they were really focused on culture, it meant that they could focus on having these opportunities to listen back to their staff. What's going on? What works? How do we get the best teams together? How do we get you all working well together? And I think that's really important in architecture because I think
Yeah.
a lot of conversations about architecture, we're always talking about long hours and low pay. There are some people doing it really well. So, I think we need to talk about those great examples of where people are doing it really well. And I think when you kind of move between offices, you can see what works and what doesn't. But it works for the office, it might work for the scale, and it might work
Mm,
differently for different people as well. And I think that's what we need to kind of acknowledge. So for me, that worked. That scale kind of worked. But I think in terms of leadership and my kind of takeaway from that is that, the way that I lead teams in all three, like DCM, Grimshaw, and Architectus, was really kind of focusing down on the people that you work with. I think that's everything, isn't it? We're
mm,
a service industry. We work with people.
yeah.
It's just like how do you get those people to really work together well? So I think so that all of those are quite similar. That as a leader, you're kind of doing the same thing. You really like creating projects. You're working with people. You're dealing with clients. I think they're already similar, but they're just different scales and slightly different approaches for different projects.
Obviously, like you say, being a partner in a practice of 300 plus people is an incredibly kind of intimidating sounding thing, and particularly with you coming from DCM, which was a lot smaller. What was it that led to that move and that sort of ambition? Was it just about trying something else? I mean, because obviously lots of people reach that sort of mid career point, have a little bit of a wobble and kind of consider different career paths. And I've had so many friends and colleagues that have kind of moved in different directions at that point, to things outside of architecture. And we hear so much about people moving outside of architecture because of their frustrations. So it'd be interesting to sort of understand that sort of career point and that sort of milestone in your life.
Well, I mean, that was an interesting one because I could have stayed at DCM. I felt like I could have stayed there forever. And for me,
Mm.
I found that a difficult concept because, like, I can't sit
Yeah.
still very long.
Yeah.
And the idea of going, this is it, like, I think I can't remember how old I was at the time. Maybe I was about 40 when I became a partner. And I was like, oh, and everyone was like, congratulations, that must be amazing for you. And I was literally like, oh, I'm at the top. Now what?
Mm.
I really
Yeah.
felt
Yeah.
that it was, yeah, you kind of get somewhere. Like you've had this journey to get somewhere, and then you're there, and you're like, oh, I can't do this for the next like 25 years. Like, and it was fabulous, and I loved it, and it was a great place. Um, but I needed more, and I wanted to learn. So I just wanted to understand. So for me, it was about people. So I wasn't necessarily interested in working at Grimshaw, but they approached me at one point. and also said that they would make a role for me. And I found that really interesting. It's like, do what you do at DCM, just do it over here. So you're like, oh, okay, I can do that. I can just, and it was really interesting because they wanted me. And I think that's quite different to applying for a role where you have to fit a
Mm.
role. And that's
Mm.
which is kind of what I did in Australia, actually. So I worked at Architectus where I applied and I got a role. And for me, that was really uncomfortable because they weren't looking for me and everything that I had to
Yeah,
bring.
sure.
It was a role that I had to fulfill. And I was like, that's not how I
Mm.
work. So they kind of change. I think one of my friends said once, like about that time, she said, actually, you realize you get to a point where it's not about the work. It's about your everyday. Like, do you want to
Mm.
walk into that office every day? And you're like,
Yeah.
yeah, like, it has to be a 7 out of 10 to kind of get you in. It doesn't have to be a 10 out of 10 all the time, but it
Mm.
has to it can't be like a 4. But yeah, so for me, it was about people. Like, do I want to be around these people? Is this how I work? Is this, does it tick all my boxes in terms of what I want out of a career? So yeah, so it kind of made sense for me to move to Grimshaw at times because there was so
Mm.
much learning in it, which I loved. And I love the opportunities it gave me as well. Big practice is great. Like, there's money to invest in courses and people, and there's so many other things that come with big practice so those opportunities, yeah, I really enjoy.
Yeah, it is a fascinating kind of thing because, I have so many conversations with young architects and, at the beginning of their careers, they're always asking those sort of questions of, should I go for a small practice? Should I go for a big practice? What are the experiences like and things like that? And, I think that's the thing. It's just like trying, like you say, trying those different things because they are so different. Just like the everyday job of an architect is so different. Working in different practices are so different. I've worked in small practices, medium-sized practices, and very big practices, and the general process is probably a little bit similar, but like you say, they're just incredibly different environments, and yeah, getting a sort of taste of those is kind of a wonderful part of the sort of career journey.
Yeah. And I think you kind of have views of different ones as well. So you kind of go, oh, I
Mm.
think I'm a big practice person. And then you kind of go, well, actually, but this big practice is not right for me. Or it's about timing as well, right? It was right for me
Mm.
then. It's not right for me now. So, yeah, it's a really important, it's really interesting because I think it's got me, I've done a lot of different things. So, I've done airports, I've done like Stonehenge, I've done Aesop stores, I've done like, all different scales, all different things. But I think what it does is it kind of gets you to a point. So now, so now I'm here and you're kind of like, actually, and like, yeah, 6 months ago, I was like, actually, I don't want to do this anymore. And then it's an interesting one because I think a lot of people kind of get to where I'm at now. And actually, a lot of senior women I know are leaving, become client side, become consultants. They
Mm.
do other things because
Mm.
you're just like, actually, like I don't want to be putting a whole lot of work in, putting my heart into something I don't believe in. So it's just like,
Yeah.
what does that look like now? So that's why I kind of stepped back and went, all right, I'm out. I don't want to be part of this at the moment. I want to take my skills and I want to somehow strip back the levels of process and the levels of hierarchy and get back to being a hands-on architect and all the kind of things you love, but be able to do it and bring that kind of value of your experience to people that really need it. So you're just like, actually, I could be doing work for directly with people who are, need social and affordable housing, or they need kind of community projects, and bring that value to their projects and bring that design and that expertise, and that will have a bigger impact than what I'm doing sometimes as a small cog in a bigger company in a big wheel, because you can just strip back
Mm.
all the process. So that's what I'm looking at doing now is really looking at it, seeing whether it's possible. I haven't quite nailed it yet. To strip back all those layers and just be a hands-on architect and just bring that expertise and value to kind of small scale projects.
With that in mind, what are the I mean, obviously, just sort of context. Obviously, you worked in London for a long period of time. Now have returned to Australia, and now you're starting, your own practice, what are those lessons that you're taking with you? You know, what is the value proposition that you're making? And I suppose, just for context again, your new practice is focused on sort of, you know, socially sustainable architecture, working with communities and things like that. How, you know, how transferable are all those skills from airports and visitor centers to that sort of thing? And I think it's probably a leading question, but, you know, that clarity of design idea and the architect as the sort of collaborator and negotiator that you kind of mentioned previously.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think they all lead into it. And it's really interesting when people think and actually they talk about it a lot more in Australia than in London. They talk about sectors. And you're just like, actually, when you're an architect, the thinking that you might put into a hotel, you might put into a school, you might put into, you know, like you do a visitor center, you might also do, you know, so I was doing another project for the Botanic Gardens, you know, so it's all about visitors and flows and movement of people and how they experience space. So I think those lessons you can take from anywhere. So smaller projects. I mean, I think in terms of the design experience, I mean, for me, it's all transferable. So it's all about design
Mm,
thinking. If you understand how people move through space, you understand how people find joy in space. So if you understand light and scale and movement, I think, you know, it all kind of transfers. I think the business of architecture is an interesting one because I've always been interested in the business of architecture. So that's a whole part of setting up your own practice, which is, you know, something you don't do in big practice, but something I did at DCM because it was
sure.
much smaller. So I was more hands-on. So the skills that I got from running a business in DCM, I can bring over. Some of the skills from like Stonehenge, I think it was so transferable because it's all about people and movement. But, you know, building and understanding building, you know, that's always transferable into this kind of space. But I think as well, when you've been quite senior, the way you talk, the way you win work, the way you talk about work, and the way you can actually communicate a design idea, that kind of clarity is something that people miss when they're actually talking about these smaller projects, which
Mm,
is why I was really interested in going into these smaller projects because I think I don't know. You see these architects like doing these like small, beautiful projects, and you're like, what are you doing? Like, why have they got like someone straight out of uni when they could have someone like, you know, they could have a fantastic project here. You've really missed it. And sometimes
sure. Yeah.
it's literally about the cost. So you're just like, okay, they think the cost of an architect doesn't stack up. But if you can make that value work, why can't you bring that value and that expertise to actually do something really effective and impactful in the right areas? But yeah,
Mm,
it should work. In theory, it should work. So we'll see. It needs a bit of time to get going. But I think for me to set this up and do it in this way, but also set up the culture that I want to set up and the culture that I want to work in, I think for me is
sure.
really important. But and the last bit, so part of it is about projects and part of it's like how you do the projects. So part of it is like doing community projects, but not taking I find it really uncomfortable the space of people doing social housing yet taking a profit from that. I
Mhm.
don't think things that are community based and necessary we should be taking a profit from. So, you know, so part of what I'm setting up in my business is to set it up so the profits then get rolled back into people and community to create a cycle where it perpetuates, you know, better outcomes for everybody.
Yeah, fascinating. What is it about those projects that draw you to it? Is it about that sort of that education piece? Because obviously a lot of the people that you're probably going to be working with don't probably talk the same, you know, architect language that maybe some of the, you know, more developer led things in London were doing. You know, how much you kind of see yourself as a guide on that process and you know, probably some of those skills from negotiating and collaborating, you know, how does that all kind of fit into these sorts of projects, I suppose?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting one because I think you almost have to act smarter because you have to understand the questions they're asking. So you have to
Mhm.
listening is such a, you know, massive skill in this space because it is new. These are new clients. I think the other thing to kind of reflect on is that a lot of people, a lot of the clients are actually similar women or similar people to me where, they have been building professionals. They have gone, oh my God, my career is just too much. I've had enough. I want to go and do something that's more rewarding. So they are kind of leading these practices, and these clients, client bodies for social and affordable housing, or for kindergartens, or for community projects. So actually, you
Mm.
do find these people who are similar in mind and similar, looking for something more kind of fulfilling as a professional, as a building professional. So actually, there's quite a lot of similar people who understand what it is as architects that we're selling. So I think the language thing, you have to be careful and just understand who you're speaking to, but and
Mm.
understand that actually different particularly government bodies or community bodies have different funding requirements. So the shape of projects and processes have to reflect that. So actually selling something back to them that actually fits in with what they need, rather than
Sure.
kind of saying, this is what we do, this is how we do it. You go,
Yeah.
okay, what do you need? How do we do that? How do we get the
Mm.
funding to work? How do we move to the next stage? Can we just do some sketches to get this going? Like, what does that look like? So I think pausing, listening, and really understanding clients to kind of work with them for what they need. So it's kind of shared outcomes. I think that's the important part. So kind of similar, it's all similar for architecture, that we
Mm.
do, but I kind of feel that it's just more hands-on, and it's just more there's an impetus to make this work. You have to make it work. You can't just sit there and go, oh, just look at a catalog and get some blah, blah, blah out and draw it on a page. It's like, no, this is real. These are kids that will otherwise be on the street. Can you just get this, make it safe, make it beautiful, get light in? But, it has to be cheap and cheerful here to get this to work. So it's great. So the impetus is there. But I think as well, you kind of get to a point where you just want to have a nice legacy. So you don't want to be working, I don't know, in a big practice doing kind of big things. You just like, actually, I just want to leave my career doing lovely stuff.
So why now then? What is it, having spent, a long time at these larger practices, building up, very big projects and building up lots of experience. Why start on your own now? Why not 20 years ago? What is it about this point in your career? You mentioned the sort of frustrations and stuff earlier, but yeah, I'd love to kind of peek behind the curtain of that.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting one, because I kind of feel that anyone that's doing this kind of thing that I'm doing at the moment, is in their 20s and just finishing uni. Like, it's a funny time to be a startup, because you're like, I'm just starting, but I'm
Mm.
kind of the other end of the career. But if not now, when? And I think
Mm.
that is a good question. So COVID was interesting point for me and my family. We were, I think for everyone, we're in London, like, there was quite a lot of time for reflection. Like, what are
Sure.
we
Yeah, yeah.
doing? So so it was just after COVID, we decided to move to Australia,
Mm.
because we were like, we want to move. If we don't go now, when? When? If you don't do this now, like, life's short. Like, what are we doing? Like, we want a different lifestyle for our kids. We'd always talked about going to Australia. So we're like, if we don't do this now, we've got nothing to lose. If we didn't like
Mm.
it, if we don't like it, we can move back. It's not a big deal. Like, it's the other side of the world, but we'll make it work, and we love it. I think the same attitude kind of applied to my career. I was like, I don't want to be kind of sitting around going, what if? Like, what if?
Mm.
So I kind of always thought I would go out on my own at some point, and toyed with it a few times. And then it's like, look, if I don't do this now, when? When do you do it? I'm 50 now. Like, when do I can put a good 15 years in and do something, at in my own pace, in
Yeah.
my own
Yeah,
way.
absolutely.
And then, and this is the kind of, my last kind of phase of my career. Although I'm still open to changing that, because I think changing it up is also exciting. So never
Yeah,
say
no, I
never.
think you're right. It's having that sort of that approach and that mindset, isn't it? If opportunities come along, we'll look at them, and you don't hold too much weight to things, and you're a bit flexible with them. How was that process moving back to Australia as an architect? I know you had to sort of, is it the transfer, the sort of registration of your final architecture degree?
You don't need to. So surprisingly, a lot of people aren't registered in Australia.
Okay.
Well, less so than in the UK. So when people come from overseas, they don't necessarily do it. But the mutual recognition opened last year,
Mm.
so I took the opportunity to take that route. The Also what it did for me. So the main difference. So architecture is very similar here, just got different words. So
Yeah.
every yeah, and it's really hard to remember the words. Even like I swear every second day I'm googling what's VAT in Australia. What's VAT? It just doesn't always sink in because the terms are
Yeah,
the
true.
same, just
Mm.
different. But so doing that meant that I had to do an application. You have to do an interview, so it's like doing your part 3 interview.
Mm.
And I was part 3 examiner for like 10, 12 years. So all of a sudden I'm on the other side of the table. So I was like, oh my God,
Yeah.
I have to prepare for this. I know how serious this is. So yeah, I definitely got down and I was swatting to get. So I'm glad I did it because I really kind of had to refresh all those things in my mind and
Mm.
understand the
Mm.
differences. But it's kind of really similar to the UK. It's just different, very different terms. So it's just remembering what they are. But besides that, I think culturally there's a few differences
Mm.
in practice. So sometimes clients I feel a little bit more empowered here, whereas
Okay.
in the UK, in the UK, an architect has a role and you go and do it. Whereas in Australia, they very much will tell you what they want, and you just like, oh, okay. You're like, yeah, but I can give you this, and they're like, well, this is. So it's a little bit
Mm.
more prescribed. So it's a slightly different balance of working, which is slightly uncomfortable, but otherwise same.
You mentioned about being a Part 3 examiner. I know you've had lots of different experiences, in your London career, being involved in numerous sort of bodies, panels, groups, things like that. How, how have they sort of impacted on your career and sort of what opportunities have come from them? And I suppose the crux is, how much would you encourage other people in their careers to become involved in those things that, you've been passionate about?
Oh, I mean, I definitely would, and I think for me, it kind of comes down to that gender. So it's so when I started, when I started architecture, like it was a bit more challenging, and I had amazing mentors and role models. So so I always wanted to kind of give back a little. So that's why I started kind of working with universities, doing part 3, mentoring, doing those kind of roles. I felt that that was
Mm.
kind of part of what I could give people. So and so I was always part of kind of groups for women in architecture, and then I joined the RIBA group for Architects for Change, the diversity group, which was great, and then was on the RIBA Council. But I think what was important to me was like-minded people. So do you know that
Mm.
really those people that I met who were getting out doing those kind of roles were my network. Do you know? And I'm still in touch with them, and then, you're going through your career and you can bounce ideas, you know, you're just
Mm.
like, what are you doing? How's this working? Like, what's going on? And actually, I think for me, that was kind of always my dial in the industry. It's just like what's happening, what's realistic, because I know that I'm always a little bit like, oh, we can always work in this amazing way. And then just like, okay, what's real? What are we really doing? What are people really asking? What are the challenges? So for me, that was it was always quite grounding to have that kind of network and similar to me, who are all getting out there and doing these kind of roles around diversity. So a lot of what I did kind of built around um, diversity, but then also I had some kind of education roles as well. So I was lecturing at a few different places and mentoring and part 3 examining.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love it. I just love the connection. I mean, students are always so optimistic. Like I love
Mm.
that about students, the energy, the optimism, the kind of outlook. So I do a few crits here in Melbourne, which is great. But yeah, I really miss that about my life in London, how involved I was in the culture of architecture. And
Mm.
it's less so in Melbourne at the moment, but that's something I'm looking at building up a bit more with as I meet more people.
As I suppose, as you say, it's very easy to become sort of isolated in, particularly if you are a larger practice or, even a smaller practice, isolated in that sort of, the party line, if you will, and this is what architecture is, and understanding the process and stuff, and having something that, like you say, is your kind of dial into other ways of working, how other architects are doing it, how the industry is kind of reacting to different things is incredibly beneficial. And yeah, like you say, it's a being able to cast your net a bit wider and understand, what your peers are doing is kind of fascinating. Um, I wonder if we just could talk about the sort of the gender item, and obviously you spent, a huge part of your career, passionately, trying to balance the sort of the gender role and within the industry, and like you say, coming from, a period in the past of difficulty. Where do you see the industry now, and do you think over your time in it, it has improved? And I think, even reading Bespoke's sort of global survey the other day, the there is still a reported, gender pay gap, and every year it does seem to reduce ever so slightly, but it is still, a huge problem in the industry. I wonder whether you talk about that.
Yeah, it's still a huge problem. I think people, and there's different attitudes. Like you look at what Trump's doing in America, like just
Yeah.
disbanding or diversity initiatives. But I mean, I think it's interesting. It takes work. It takes work, and you have to be conscious of these things. And I think because what happens, as soon as things like COVID happen, the first thing that happens is you lose women and you lose minorities from the industry. So
Mm.
it just takes a blip, takes a financial crisis or any kind of recession. And the blip, the first people to go are the people that are struggling around the edges. So, they're the young mums, or they're the minorities from lower socioeconomic circumstances where they can't kind of hang in there, and they're the people you're losing. And it's really interesting actually doing crits at universities. As soon as they put the fees up in the UK, the diversity of projects it just went, and you're like,
Yeah.
wow, oh, that's interesting. So yeah, the project started becoming a little bit more similar. And I think it's really interesting when you start looking at what it means to not have diversity. But I think the discussion around diversity has widened a little. Yeah, I mean, in answer to your question, like it's still an issue. Like people need to be
Yeah.
cognizant of what it means to try and keep women in the industry. And it's not just about getting women in, keeping them through childbirth, keeping them, having kind of a broad view when they're struggling with lack of sleep and they've got young children, or they're not balanced, their husbands aren't helping always, so it's bigger than architecture, it's cultural issues. And there's a lot of things going on. But I think if you broadened it out into health and well-being, a lot of these issues that you're talking about for diversity and for gender are actually just making the practice a nicer place to work. And that it
Yeah.
just helps everybody. It's not about, you always get this feedback and pushback going, why do you keep talking about women? What about everyone else? And you're like, no, 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 no. Like, if you're supporting, like, the people that are just hanging into the industry, you're supporting the industry. Like, you're making better working conditions. You're listening to people. You're getting feedback. You're just making this a better industry for everyone to work, particularly for all our mental health. Like, we're a bit more aware of mental health now than we were like 10, 15 years ago. But and I think once we bring that on board and support people through their careers, we're making it a better place to work. And I think for me, that's really important. And I think a measure of that is things like the gender pay gap, because, you are
Mm.
seeing where are women not present. And if they're not present in the boardroom, you're not getting the different voices and the different kind of approaches and the different, you know, different aspects and the different ways of thinking across the table. But, and then in some practices you can see like the difference between introverts and extroverts. You're just like, you got to balance your voices, you let people be heard and listen to different people who have different accents or different ways of speaking or different approaches. Because like, I kind of feel that as architects, we need to, we design cities. We design cities for all sorts of people. Like, why do we not look like all sorts of people? So yeah, so there's more of a journey. I think people need to keep focused. It's not something that you go, hey, we did that, we've done well, tick
Yeah,
that
sure.
box. Because I think there's still, I mean, out of university, I think it's tipped the balance. In Australia, I think the figures have tipped the balance. So there's more than 50% of women coming out of university, but they're not staying. Like, and now I see women my age. So there's an awful statistic. I think it's 30% of women going through menopause will leave their jobs, and you're just like, oh my god, like that's 30% of senior women. So you're just like, okay, there's not many senior women anyway. What does that really mean? So yeah, it's an interesting ongoing issue.
With that in mind, how have you kind of felt yourself in those sort of senior positions, as a female voice within, we talk about your sort of senior positions within DCM, Grimshaw, things like that. You know, do you feel like you were fighting an uphill battle with those within the boardrooms there? Was your voice equal, and did you feel like it was, a difficult place to be sometimes?
The I think the short answer is no. And I think that's because I wanted to work at places where I would be heard. So that's, for me, that's important. The But yeah, interesting. I mean, there were still moments where you're not heard. You go on site. I remember being on site for a one of our projects with a grad, and they were
Mm.
asking him questions because he's the guy, and you're just like, oh my god, like 30 years older. Like, what? He's like, why are they asking me questions? I was like, because I'm a woman. Like, do you know, and that's gonna happen. But
Well,
that's still, I mean, it still happens. And I think, yeah, but the rooms that I was in purposely, I would only work with people where I felt that I was heard. But also
sure.
I'm at that kind of age where I don't actually need to watch. I don't feel I need to. I probably need to. I don't watch what I say as much anymore because I feel
Oh,
confident enough to speak up. So, and I think that's a good thing. And I think, we get to this point where we speak up, but we can speak up for those that don't, right? And so I think that is really important. So like picking up. So if there is kind of, bad language, I find Australians love a bit of sexual innuendo, like a lot
mm,
of it. And then sometimes you're just like, we're at work, like that is not appropriate. Do you know? And I think it's really important to call that out and go, look, I'm uncomfortable with that. That's not okay for me. But I feel empowered to do that. And I would I think I would struggle to work anywhere where I didn't feel empowered to speak.
yeah,
So I
yeah.
think that's it. And I think that's really important.
With that in mind, I wonder whether, as we're sort of coming to a close a little bit, what do you think people could take from your journey? And if there's a young female coming into the profession, for example, what are those kind of piece of advice that you would be giving, to your sort of younger selves around, not only the sort of career and the sort of design aspects, but about also, making yourself heard and standing up for yourself, and getting into those rooms where, it's on an equal footing.
Well, I think it's interesting because it's not just about gender, it's about all otherisms. So it's like
Mm,
a lot of the time we feel like we're the only person in the room that represents whatever it is. And I think that's really interesting, whether you feel too young, whether you feel that you're just, not otherwise represented. Um, for me, it's about self-belief. It's just like find a
mm,
room where people want to listen to you. And there are rooms that people will listen. And I think for me, that's really important. And I think all the kind of decisions, yeah, it's funny because I know you sent all the questions over. So you're kind of reflecting in advance, going, okay, you look at your career
sure.
and you kind of like, when it kind of happens, you're kind of bumbling along.
Mm,
You've got careers are a little bit by design, a little bit of luck. It's all about timing. A lot of things going on that, is not
mm,
completely in your control. But I think one thing that I've kind of held fast to is it's just like, this is me. This is what I believe in. This is what I want. This is what I want to
mm,
work. I want to work in a nice office with nice people. That's not too much to ask for. I don't think that's too much to ask. And do architecture in a nice way. Do you know? Like I'm not, if someone asked me to stay up all night doing competition, I would probably have some not nice words to say back. Like that's not how I work. And I think part of that is, just being really good at communicating who you are and what your expectations are,
mm,
and get that back. And I think and what I loved about being in London and recruiting like young architects now will tell you what they want. Like, a lot of them will come in and say, this is what I'm looking for. I think that's great. I love that they have a voice. I love that they want to be heard. I love, and I think it's up to us as kind of leadership and managers to just be listening to those voices. So, that would be my advice to any young people. It's just like those voices and that diversity of voices is so important. And, that's what makes our work, our lives interesting. What makes our work interesting. So, don't shut up. Say what you want to say.
Yeah, I completely, and I do think that is a wonderful thing about the next sort of generation, is that a lot of people do feel like they found their voice and are okay at communicating it, which, as you say, is a brilliant skill to have. And some of us maybe don't always find that until later stages of our career. Just to end on, and it's a question that I ask all of the guests on the podcast: has your career turned out how you imagined it? And I think, as you alluded to a second ago, careers are sometimes by design, sometimes by luck, sometimes by chance, sort of thing. I suppose, how much of your career has been intentional and how much has been through sort of adaptation and things like that? I think, you've kind of communicated a wonderful sort of approach to just being able to try things out, I suppose. And, that's a kind of brilliant ability to have. So, yeah, I suppose, has your career turned out how you imagined?
I mean, that's what is great about architecture. It's always a surprise. You never quite know. I didn't expect to be starting up a business at this age. Like, I feel like I've literally gone back to ground zero. Like, and I'm a student. Like, my head is spinning with everything going on all at once, and you're just like, oh my god, like, what is going on? I kind of didn't expect that. Um, but I don't hate it. Like, this is exactly where I want to be right now. So
Mm.
it's, I'm kind of proud of myself for sticking through this and going, okay, this is who you are. Like, well done. Like, you're just doing what you want to be doing. I love that. But I think, but you can't gloss over the fact that it is an architecture career. You've got employers, you've got jobs. One of my last jobs at Grimshaw, I was doing I was doing some rubbish. Like, literally, I was doing the recycling center in Edmonton. So literally, I was
Oh,
doing
wow.
rubbish,
Okay. Yeah.
and I was like, they're like, we want you to take over this job, and I was like, wow, that's a lot of rubbish. That's rubbish. Do you know, like, I loved it. Like, I really loved it. Like, it really, and I think that's the thing about architecture. It will surprise you. My team was fantastic. The work was
Mhm.
great. The client was great. Do you know? And it actually was really interesting about, all the processes of how things would be, divided up, how recycling was done, what building materials could be reused. I had no idea how bad plasterboard was. Like, do you know, it was a
Mm.
real learning experience. And that came from like a project I would have never. Someone asked me to
Mm.
do like a rubbish and recycling center. I would have like gone, no way. Are you kidding me? But and I think that's the interesting thing about architecture. It will surprise you. Do you know? Like, there's always learning. There's always great things you can do. Small great things, and so this is not my career. I would never have guessed it would roll out like this. But in the same breath, I recognize myself through all of it, which is what I intended to do. So that's my intent, but it's just kind of rolled out around me. Glad to be here
I think that's
where I am now.
Yeah, I think that's great. Thank you so much for joining me.
No problem. Thanks for having me.